Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me, Rotary Club, and thank you for being here. Each person who's in the room tonight. Um, I wanted to open by talking just for a moment about why I became interested in virtual reality a couple of years ago. Um, I was actually moved to investigate VR standing in a hotspot restaurant in Beverly Hills. And that's probably the last place you would think of, that someone would become interested in VR. But I was waiting for a table at this hotspot restaurant in Beverly Hills. And I looked out into the restaurant and I noticed how many people were on their phones. Of course, this is common anywhere you go now, but I noticed that everyone in the restaurant, every single person, even if they were sitting at a table with another person, they were on their phone. And it got me to thinking in that moment. I wondered if 30, 40, 50 years ago, when the scientists that were developing the microchips that made these phones possible, I began to wonder if they had any sense of what the product of the technology we're creating would one day achieve. And I wonder if they could have seen in the future and seen that people were just engaging with these devices rather than speaking to each other, if that would have had any impact on the development and creation of the technology that they were working on. And in that moment, I thought to myself and I said, I wonder what technology is being developed now that might have a massive, massive effect on the future of humankind that perhaps I could be involved with. I wonder if somebody could be in the room that wants to help make the world a better place when it comes to developing this VR technology. And I found one way to get involved in an industry is to write a book about that industry. So I went to my publisher and I said, I want to write a book about storytelling in virtual reality, because it occurs to me that no single technology ever fully succeeds until human beings figure out how to tell a story with it. When you look at film, we had film for 20 years before we figured out, what will really make this technology resonate with people is if we can figure out how to tell stories with it. We had radio, television, all of these technologies existed long before we told stories with them, but they really took off and they gained mass appeal when we began to learn the process of telling stories with these technologies. Even the internet, was around a long time. But when my mother decided to buy a computer and get signed up for the internet, it was because she wanted to be a part of the stories that her grandchildren were telling. She wanted to be a part of the story of their lives. And so I would suggest to you that there's a deep, deep connection, a mythic connection between story and storytelling and virtual reality in any new and emerging technology that we have. And tonight, I really hope to share with you a bit about where I see some of these connections happening. And the grand hope that I would have for this evening is that we might somehow find a deeper place in our own journeys by engaging and learning a bit more about myth and storytelling and why that matters in a technological space such as this. Stephen, can we go to that first slide? It's no surprise to many of you that I'm going to be quoting quite a bit of Joseph Campbell tonight. So I love the work that Campbell did, and I love the ideas that he has brought to us. And I will say up front, it's not because I worship the ground of who Campbell was, but I'm fascinated and intrigued by the universal nature of his ideas And I'm fascinated by now, so many years after his death, how these ideas still seem to have relevance to the way that we tell stories now in our society and in our culture. So Campbell said that mythology tells us that where you stumble, there your treasure is. And where it seems most challenging lies the greatest invitation to find deeper and greater powers in ourselves. There's a lot of things I love about what Campbell says here, but I think what really intrigues me is this word invitation. That there's a great invitation to find deeper and greater powers in ourselves. Friends, tonight I would suggest to you that stories are invitations. Stories are invitations to look at the world in a new and exciting, different way than perhaps we ever have before. I'm so thankful that the world has gained so many new voices of storytellers that have never had an opportunity to tell their stories before. Because in gaining the voices of storytellers that have never had the chance to tell their story before, we all are becoming richer. We all are becoming we're all coming into a new place and perspective in the world that we've never had as humankind, because of this invitation to find deeper and greater powers in ourselves, which comes through the stories of others. Let's go to the next slide. Tonight, I would like to talk to you for a few minutes about this idea of buried treasure. And then I would love to open it up and maybe just, talk to you a little bit and us have a conversation and engage. But I'll tell you, I've been fascinated by the idea of buried treasure ever since I was a little boy. I grew up in the forests of East Texas, and I used to love to go and search for treasures that I thought would be buried out in the woods somewhere. I must have went on 1,000 treasure hunts in my lifetime, and I'll tell you what, I never found any treasure of any substance that anyone else would recognize, but the experiences I had, the stories that I can now tell, they ended up being the treasure. And tonight, I hope to share with you the idea that stories are one of the many treasures that we can find in this world, but the treasure is also buried in others. And there are ways that we can find treasure in others. And finally, this idea that treasure is buried within ourselves, and that the greatest and truest treasure that we might can find is within ourselves. Let's go to the next slide. The idea that treasure might lie in other people is it's one of our most ancient thoughts. It's one of our most ancient ideas. We have long recognized that we are a social people, that we need others. So much of what was done in early human tribal societies was to keep the balance of human beings within the tribe. So much of communication and storytelling that was done in early societies was about reassuring one's place within the tribe. It was about reassuring what the tribe had to offer within a culture. Let's go to the next slide. I'd like to sort of open this idea by sharing with you some stories and some fairy tales and some myths, and I feel like one of the ways that we could open our discussion tonight of looking for buried treasure is by talking about one of the buried treasures that many people may be a bit unfamiliar with, and this is the idea of the magic mirror. And rather than use the magic mirror from Snow White or one of the other more common fairy tales, I'd like to instead focus on a magic mirror from a Rhodesian story that comes from an African oral tradition. And it's captured in the Rhodesian tale in Andrew and Nora Lang's book, The Orange Fairy Book, that was published in 1906. It was a common story told among the Sena people. And the hero of this story, as was the hero in so many Rhodesian stories, is this character named Gopani Kufa. And Gopani Kufa is a character and a name that is known throughout much of Africa, but especially in the Rhodesian culture. And one day when Gopani Kufa is out hunting, he encounters an antelope and a snake who've become ensnared while the snake was trying to eat the antelope, and the antelope was trying to escape. And Gopani Kufa, he isn't sure what to do, so he consults the wise wasp that he carries with him, like you do. The wasp tells him to save the snake. And so the antelope is appalled and tells him that the decision will eventually be his undoing. The snake takes Gopani Kufa back to his homeland, and he takes the form of a human king. He tells Gopani Kufa that he can have anything in his entire kingdom as thanks for sparing his life. Gopani Kufa spends a few days in the kingdom and he can't make up his mind what he wants. And again, he consults the wisdom of the wise wasp that he carries with him everywhere. And the wasp tells him to ask for the king's mirror because the mirror grants the wishes of the one that owns it. The king doesn't want to give up the mirror, but he eventually relents, and Gopani Kufa returns the next day with the mirror and uses it to make his own homeland wonderful. Everything goes really well, and his homeland is made wonderful, and he gives the mirror to his daughter to place under her pillow for safekeeping. He doesn't need it anymore because he's made his homeland wonderful. Well, the story goes on, and eventually a group of white men, the first Gopani Kufa has ever seen, come into the land and end up stealing the mirror. The Rhodesians told the story to explain why the powers of the earth rests with white men, because they still had the mirror. And while there's so many different directions we could go in dissecting such a story as this, from symbolism to slavery, I'd like to focus on the idea of the magic mirror holding power. Because I believe we've become a society where nearly every member carries around a magic mirror in their pocket. And whether Apple or Android, we have never, as human beings, ever held such power so casually and had so little to do with it. We've had so little idea of what to do with it. Technology has become the tribal fire that we're now all gathered around, even as I love technology, and I think it's important to say that up front, especially as a preface for what I'm about to say. I'm somebody that loves technology. I've written a lot about technology. However, I fear that capitalism has become the only driving force behind the technology that we create. And I think that highlights the importance of why groups like Rotary are so important in trying to make the world a better place. And myth has so much to teach us about technology. From Hephaestus's crafting of Talos to Icarus to Daedalus to the Chinese folklore of Yanxi, the mechanical man that could walk and sing with perfect pitch, we could easily simply view our phones as amplified voyeurism on steroids, or there's certainly, truth to that idea. Author David Foster Wallace once suggested that most voyeurism takes place through framed glass, and mirrors are no exception to that, and neither are our phones. But these mirrors that we hold in our hands are powerful. And even though they seem to only be projecting images in one direction, I would suggest that they have the power to reflect back to us who we really are. And relating to this idea of the magic mirror and what we're trying to accomplish through technology, the treasure, the buried treasure that we're looking for with the technology of our phones, I believe it very much is similar to what Campbell said, and that is that people are not so much looking for the meaning of life as much as the experience of having lived. And so often, Our phones provide a certain level of experience, but it rarely compares to the type of experience that we have just going and living our life in the world. I would suggest to you tonight that as much as I love binge watching television shows, no one is going to be on their deathbed telling their grandchildren about the time they binge watched Game of Thrones. No one is going to be on their deathbed telling their family about a great text conversation that they once had. We're going to be recounting those stories of when we truly lived. And that is where the treasure is. It's in those experiences within ourselves, in the experiences that we share with others. It's in those experiences that sometimes we don't even plan for, but that often take us by surprise. Let's go to the next slide. I often think right now about cell phones being this magic mirror, and it reminds me so much of the myth of Narcissus, and. Narcissus was, an interesting mythological figure, but I think we often write off the motivations of people that we describe as narcissists very easily without considering the amount of narcissism that we all have, that we're all trying to look at a reflection of ourself that makes sense. We're all trying to look into the technology we're investing in. We're all trying to look into each other and find some meaning or version of ourself that makes sense. So I don't fault us for the time we spend on our phones or the time we spend in technology. I believe it's the next step in our pursuit for meaning, in our pursuit for trying to figure out what is this experience called consciousness. What is this experience called life? Let's go to the next slide. It's dangerous to stay so focused on ourselves, and so much of our technology allows us to do that we forget that we're in this world together. I live in Los Angeles, and I am constantly challenged in my own humanity every time I drive down the freeway at the selfish nature of human beings, and I often feel like the freeways have become war zones of self-interest when it comes to just trying to get from point A to point B. And I've been thinking a lot lately about this quote from Campbell where he said, the ultimate aim of the quest must be neither release or ecstasy for oneself, but the wisdom and power to serve others. I have never found more treasure and meaning than I have in serving others, in making some part of my life about service to others. I believe that the richness that we look for in technology is that connection that we want to have with other people. It's why we pursue social media and put up with all the problems in social media. It's why we pursue time, even in technologies like this, to connect with each other here in alt space, because we want to have some sense that we're connected to each other. We could engage technology all by ourselves, but even as we engage technology, such as these headsets, these HMDs that we're wearing tonight, we're still wanting to engage other people. There's this human element of others that we need that is key to the enrichment of our stories. Let's go to the next slide. The treasure in ourselves can be one of the most challenging aspects of finding treasure, because most of us have become real experts at seeing the negative side of ourselves. Most of us have become real experts at seeing the faults we have. But I would like to suggest to you tonight that we're not going to move ahead as a culture. We're not going to move ahead as human beings. We're not going to get any further in our stories and individual journeys by deep focus on the issues within ourselves that are problematic. We're not going to get any further by focusing on the issues that are problematic in others. And this is not a call for happy-go-lucky invitation to be unrealistic about the world. This is an invitation to say perhaps we've been too focused on what we believe is either a good story or a bad story in the world, when every story is capable of being a better story. I believe no matter what your story has been, every person is capable of a better story. Every culture is capable of a better story. And sometimes those better stories are revealed to us through hearing the stories of others. And the stories of others have great impact within ourselves. Let's go to the next slide. It's been a really interesting time this last year. I feel like it's been a very mythic time because we've been in this age of masks in a way that I never thought I would experience in my lifetime. And masks, of course, are very mythic. Masks have a great psychological effect on the wearer of a mask. And it's interesting to me the way that I notice people behaving differently when they have masks on within the public space and the public sphere. And this last year, I've seen a lot of people on social media, commenting about their experience in wearing a mask and seeing other people wearing a mask. And, you can't tell if people are smiling, and some people are so thankful that they don't have to feel like they smile at everyone. It's a really interesting experience living in this age where we've had a year of wearing masks with each other. And I think we're still trying to wrap our minds around what that experience has been like and what the meaning of that experience is. The other, thing that this last year has brought us from a mythic perspective, and it reminds me so much of some of my favorite stories, is we've had this ushering back home. There's more people working from home right now than in any point in the history of our country since the Industrial Revolution. There are more people that have had to return home for school, for work, for so many different areas of their life. For me, it has been a real conscious choice just to make sure I can leave the house at some point, because I've built such a comfort cave in my home that there almost becomes no reason to leave anymore. I can live and do my work from home, and I've had this massive returning home, and that affects your sense of time. For me, you ask me what day it is on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It all has become kind of blur's day for me. I can usually nail Monday, and I know when it's Friday, and I know when it's the weekend, but that middle part of the week has really gotten mushy for me. And this idea of returning home, it does begin to affect us in very interesting psychological ways. This idea of returning home is of course very mythic, and let's jump to the next slide. The idea of returning home has appeared in some of the greatest stories and myths throughout history. We, of course, have stories like Odysseus, who's just trying to sail and get back home. But even in our more recent times, we've had stories like The Wizard of Oz, which is just the story of a young woman trying to get back home. We have stories like E.T., which is just a story about them trying to get an alien back home. Almost any road trip movie or story that's ever existed is trying to get about trying to get back home. And there's something to that. There's something that home represents to us psychologically and mythically that is greater than any single structure or dwelling. Home is a place that I believe we're trying to get to within ourselves. We're trying to find a place of comfort, a place of peace, a place of belonging within ourselves. And we look for metaphors to express that with. Let's go to the next slide. That idea of returning home, how many people have seen the movie E.T.? I used to assume everybody had seen the movie E.T., and I've learned as I get older that not everyone has seen the movie E.T. But I'm thrilled to see so many of you have seen the movie E.T. And there's a real profound sub-theme that's going on in the movie E.T. that has to deal with the return home. And part of that sub-theme has to deal with something that Steven Spielberg was working through himself at the time when he was making the movie. And he was beginning to deal with the divorce of his parents from when he was a child. And if you look closely at the film E.T., there's a really interesting thing that happens with parents. It's mostly a story about children who are trying to get this alien back home and who are keeping this alien secret from the adults. And in the story, there's a really interesting scene where Elliot, the main character, wants to call his father because he thinks he's seen an alien. And his mother gets very upset about this. And we learn through the subtext of the scene that basically the rest of the family is not on good terms with the father. And this is a story where this family is trying to reconcile the absence of this father figure. And in the story, E.T. steps onto the scene, and E.T. becomes a replacement father figure. E.T. becomes, in a sense, the father who brings a new home to the family. But at the end of the film, and this is a spoiler alert, but let's be honest, you've had 40 years to see the film, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much here. At the end of the story, they have to let E.T. go. They have to let E.T. return back home. They have to let go of this father figure. The thing they had pursued, the thing they had wanted so much, they've got to set free. They've got to turn loose. Something in gaining a sense of home that we also have to sacrifice something. We have to give something up. Let's go to the next slide. This idea of treasure within ourselves in the sense of home is something that Campbell talked a lot about. And he said to find your own way is to follow your own bliss. This involves analysis, watching yourself and seeing where the real deep bliss is. Not the quick excitement, but the real deep life-giving bliss. Campbell, of course, is greatly known for this saying, follow your bliss. And so many people have taken that saying and made a bumper sticker out of it to just say that following your bliss is about just doing whatever you want to do. And that is very much not what Campbell was saying. When he talked about following your bliss, he was talking about the hard work of digging within yourself and finding that true path towards the treasure that only one individual is able to find within themselves. He was talking, in a sense, about finding home, about returning home within yourself. Let's go to the next slide. I've thought a lot about the ways that stories have been impacting me, and the way storytelling has been impacting me since the beginning of COVID. Especially, stories have always had a special place in my heart and have always had deep impact on me. I'll say this. I have had a new and profound appreciation of stories and storytelling in a way that I never have before since the beginning of COVID. And I spend a lot of my time reading about old folk stories and myths and stories that have not been heard, in some time. And as I was reading about the power of story and storytelling in myth and folklore this last year, I came across this particular story that had a lot of impact on me, and I hope it resonates with you. Many years ago, there was a rabbi who oversaw the spiritual direction and protection of the village. And this rabbi, he was able, whenever trouble would come to the people of his village, he was able to go out to a certain place in the forest, and he was able to say the words of a very specific prayer, and in a certain ritual light a fire, and the trouble would be avoided. Well, when he grew old and the position was passed to a younger rabbi, that rabbi knew where in the forest to go, and he knew the words to the prayer, but he no longer knew quite how to light the fire. Still, somehow, the trouble was avoided. And when that rabbi grew very old, the next rabbi came along, and that rabbi, he didn't know the place for us to go. But he did know the prayer, but he didn't know how to light the fire. And yet still, somehow, the trouble was avoided. Well, many rabbis later, a rabbi appeared that no longer knew where to go in the forest. The rabbi knew not the words of the prayer. The rabbi knew not how to light the fire. All that rabbi could do was tell the story. And somehow it was sufficient. And I would suggest to you that myths have a special power within them to somehow mystically and magically be sufficient, that stories are able to bypass our head and go to our heart in a way that cause us to be able to move through a troublesome world, and yet we don't always have the answers. See, stories are not always about providing great answers. They're often about asking great questions. And right now, we're in a world that needs to be asking better questions. We're so quick to try and jump to the answers that we miss articulating the right questions. And I think in gatherings like this, where we talk about how the world could be better, where we talk about the power of story, we can begin to get at those right questions. We can begin to get at the power that stories could hold if we can articulate the questions within them. Let's go to the next slide. How many people saw this movie? A lot of hands, a lot of hands. Yes, absolutely. I've always loved Bambi. You may not be aware, in the year the movie Bambi came out, the hunting industry went from a $4 million a year industry to a $1.8 million a year industry. Why? Because nobody wanted to shoot Bambi's mom. It had great impact on the culture, this story. People were moved in the way that they acted just through this story. Let's go to the next slide. Anybody seen this film before? It's a film called It Happened One Night. And yeah, if you've never seen it, it's a great film, really worth checking out. One historical and cultural piece that's interesting about this particular film is when this film came out, the sales of men's undershirts plummeted by 70%. Because Clark Gable takes off his shirt in this film, and it's seen that he's not wearing an undershirt. And the men of the culture said, oh, I guess we're not wearing undershirts anymore. And the sales of men's undershirts plummet by 70%. Stories have the power to change behavior. Let's go to the next slide. I've already asked you if you've seen E.T. before. We've talked for a moment about this film. In case you can't tell, this film had great impact with me in my life. And when I was 7 years old, went and saw E.T. 6 times in the movie theater. Every time I went and saw E.T. in the movie theater, I bought Reese's Pieces. And I didn't even like Reese's Pieces. But I so desperately wanted to eat E.T.'s food that I bought Reese's Pieces over and over again. Interestingly enough, initially Spielberg and Universal approached the Mars Corporation about having M&Ms be E.T.'s food, and they passed on that idea, and I'm sure somebody is still regretting that to this day. Let's go to the next slide. I'd like to start moving towards a conclusion here before I open up time for us to chat together and have a little bit of conversation with you. Again, show of hands, how many people have ever played Jenga before? Yeah, quite a few hands, a lot of people. Hopefully you are at least aware of the game of Jenga. Jenga is a really interesting game. I want you to think about it. If you've played it before, how do you win at the game of Jenga? Well, I'm going to save the suspense for you. Jenga is a game where there actually is no winner. There's just a loser. The only way you win at the game of Jenga is by not being the person that pulls the block out that makes the whole tower come crashing down. I have found, especially in our stories, in the stories we're telling each other within our culture, we have no idea what it means to win in life. We just don't want to be the loser. We are living life like a big game of Jenga. We just don't want to be the person that pulls the block out that makes the whole thing come crashing down. And I'm here tonight to suggest to you there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way that we can move towards a life in a culture, in a society that is about more than just avoiding losing. There's got to be more. And I'm encouraged when groups like this can come together and we can talk to each other about what just might be possible in the world by sharing our stories and by connecting with one another, because I'm convinced that it will be groups of people like that are gathered in this room tonight that can come together and find ways of moving forward in the world and with society in new, skillful, and more healthy ways. Let's go to the next slide. I'd like to wrap up my comments tonight by telling you one final story. Before I moved to Los Angeles, I lived in New York City, and I would ride the subway to work every day. And every day when I would get on the train, I sat across from this same this same photo that I took a photo of one day, this image that was on the subway train. I took a photo of it one day, and if you can't read it well, it's a word for people that are feeling sick on the train. And if you become nauseous or you're feeling ill on the train, it basically says it's best if you don't get on the train at all, but help will reach you a lot faster in a subway station than on the train itself. But it says if you do become helpless on the train, if you become sick or ill on the train, that someone from the MTA will stay with you until you're well enough to be on your way. And one day, as I was sitting on the train, I was struck by the words in this last sentence of the paragraph. In one of the busiest cities in the world, in one of the most congested, crazy environments, the New York subway system, was this promise that if things really go south for you, you will not be left alone. I was devastated by those words sitting on the subway, that no matter what happens, there's an assurance there that says, I won't be left alone. And I think that is where the true buried treasure is, my friends. It's in the recognition that we are all in this together, that we are not alone, and that we are trying to do the best we can by moving through life and moving through this world together. What a promise that no matter what happens, we won't be left alone. I feel like we're living in a world, in a culture, in a society where so many people feel alone. Loneliness, I think, is one of the most devastating problems in our culture and in our society. And I think at the end of the day, that is why mythologists and storytellers like myself tell stories, to assure people that they are not alone. I really appreciate your engagement tonight. I'd like to go to this last slide as we move to kind of a Q&A or conversational time. As Stephen said in his kind introduction, I work with the Joseph Campbell Foundation. Joseph Campbell has had a great impact on my life, and his work has had a great impact on my life. And recently, the Joseph Campbell Foundation has released the first ebook version of Campbell's most popular work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. It's the book that inspired George Lucas to write Star Wars. It's been impactful in a multitude of artists' lives, and you can find it anywhere that ebooks are sold. I would love to hear from you. These are different ways you can get in contact with me, and maybe we can leave that up as we begin to open up our conversation together. So what I'd love to do during this time is I would love to just open things up, and if something I said resonated with you, if something I said caused you to have a question, if something I said maybe it upsets you, I don't know. I'm willing to engage on any of that, but I would love to talk to you about what you're experiencing right now in this world of stories that we're living in. So Stephen, I'll pass the mic to you and help us set this off.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, John. I've activated the audience hand raise, so if you have questions, you can raise it online. You can also put your hand up like this as well, if you have any questions. While we're waiting for them to click in here, John, one of the things that's really fascinated me, that ending there about the not being left alone, that something can be positive sounding, but also kind of negative sounding in a way.
Yeah.
That they both can exist in the same story.
Yeah. I think that is a really key thing in the culture and society we live in right now, Steve, because most of the stories that are true in our world right now are stories that exist in the gray. They're stories that are complex. They're stories that are nuanced, and we have to be able, in our storytelling and in the way we move through the world, to be able to hold two opposing ideas in at the same time. In our left hand we may hold one idea, and in our right hand we may hold a very different and opposing idea. But I think that's the only way we can move forward. We have, in the world that we've lived in, especially in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've increasingly moved towards trying to make sure everything could be answered in very simple terms, very black and white issues. And I don't believe that has served us well as a culture. It's caused us to disconnect from the reality that is the complexity of the world that we are in.
Great. Let's go with Rebecca here.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for a wonderful talk and lots of great slides. And I was inspired by a couple things. You were talking about the Jenga and then just here not being left alone. I just finished creating a new theatrical piece that's set here in alt space, and that was kind of my starting point. Was a friend of mine who's single and nice person, and you know, um, wanting to create an experience where that's interactive in some way that kind of acknowledges. Sure, there's audience and sure there's actors, but um, I was reflecting a lot at the beginning, ironically, about the hero's journey versus like a collective journey, and not that there
Yeah.
can't be conflict and strife, but centering a narrative around something that's a little bit more of a collective engagement and trying to kind of get a little bit beyond the sort of win-lose scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, so thank you.
Oh.
That was very inspiring.
No, thank you for that comment, and I'm going to look for your theatrical piece. That's really cool that you've developed that. I think you bring up a really great point, and so many know Joseph Campbell, for the hero's journey, and I think we can very much be at risk of writing off Campbell, even because we think, oh, that's just the hero's journey guy. And if you're not a male hero, or if you're not a single person trying to move in the world, it doesn't so much apply. I think one thing that's really interesting is, Campbell wrote this book in 1949, and it's been, lauded for years after. But he really then spent the rest of his career talking about different types of journeys within cultures that were so much more focused on the collective than on the single journey of an individual. Even though in this country we very much focus on the individual, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think finding ways that we can move forward together collectively is one of the most important things we could do, but it's also one of the most mythic ideas throughout history. We see societies rise and fall on what collectives of people are able to do. It rarely rests on the shoulders of one individual. So I love that you've brought that up. I think that's so important. Thank you.
Okay. I'm freezing up here. I'm going to reboot, but in the meantime, if you can hear me, Jane, you're up. You have a question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Jane.
Oh, awesome. Hi. I love what you're doing. Storytelling is the best way to communicate these days. And so I'm a Rotarian and I belong with an organization called Volunteer Stirred. And
Mm,
I am trained to do 211. I'm in the crisis center as well. So
wow.
what we're finding out is that there are a lot of people who are isolated, who are truly feeling like they're alone because
Yeah.
they're isolated, they're elderly, they're veterans, they're a lot of them have disabilities or they might have certain mental illnesses or they just are fearful of just going out. And so we're making the VA embarked on this program called Compassionate Contact Core. The
Mm,
AARP has their program called Veteran Friendly Voice.
mm,
The 211 is looking at outbound calls to make to provide to more relationship building with people. And
Mm.
what we're finding out also is that they welcome these phone calls, these video chats with people, because it then gives them an avenue to not only know that people care about them, but also to tell their story
Yeah.
and to talk about you know their lives, um, and to share what's going on. What we're
Yeah.
finding also at the 211 Crisis Center, suicide prevention is for them to make that call to you. The fact that they're calling you for help, they may not be
Yeah.
able to say it well or not know how they're feeling as much, but the fact that you're there to ask them to listen, to be able to, see how they're doing means
Yeah.
a lot. So this whole, you're not alone thing and tell your story is so
Yeah.
impactful and so important. But
Mm.
and the good news is that there are ways of people taking action to help others
Wow.
with that.
Oh, Jane, thank you for sharing that. I am just so encouraged to hear that. That is beautiful. And, I really feel like the greatest gift that we can give other people is the gift of our stories. I've been more impacted by other people's stories than anything else. And the fact that you all there are creating an environment and a platform and making a space to do that, that is just so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That is really encouraging.
Thank you.
Okay, Melanie, do you have a question?
Sure. Well, I just wanted to say, I think the part that really inspired me the most was when you talked about masks and the symbolism of that and how
Yeah.
profound that's been. And I think also in VR, a lot of this is a mask.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'd just love to hear more about your take on the mythological side of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad you ask about that. Yeah, masks are worn for a wide variety of purposes in different cultures and different mythological traditions, and often masks are used to as tools of celebration. Sometimes masks are used to scare away evil presences. Sometimes masks are used to uh, uh, allow the wearer of the mask to embody a deity, a god or a goddess. And I think every one of those sort of ritualistic ways that ancient peoples have worn masks is a reason and a way that we wear masks today. I think, for some, the wearing of a mask in virtual reality does allow them to become a god or a goddess in certain senses. I think for some, the wearing of a mask does allow them to ward off evil presences in the type of presences, whether it be loneliness or whether it be feelings of isolation. I think there are a number of ways that we see the way that people wore masks in different cultures and ancient societies. They're still wearing them for the same reasons today. I'll tell you one very quick story about the masks that I see us wearing right now. I have a relative that likes to kind of be a jokester and a prankster, and he found some company that would print the lower half of his face on a mask. So when he's wearing his mask, it looks like his regular face, and the the interesting part of that is when he talks from behind that mask, the illusion is broken. From a distance you might not even think he's wearing a mask, but when he talks, the illusion is broken. And it reminds me that no matter what we do with masks, no matter how we try and make them transparent. Some people, in our current times of COVID, are wearing the clear shield over their face as opposed to a cloth mask or something. It doesn't change the fact that the mask it doesn't change the behavior of others as much as it changes the behavior of the wearer of the mask. We think about the mask having more impact on those that see it, but actually the greatest impact of the mask is on the person that puts the mask on.
I have to say this. I'm a big karaoke fan, and
Yeah.
we had a night at a convention I went to. We had masked karaoke, and in order to get up to sing, you had to put on a big giant dinosaur head. And at first, I was like, I don't want to do that. That's dumb. But I realized nobody else at this convention likes karaoke. I was the only one. But as soon as we got to put on the mask, everybody loved karaoke.
Yeah.
Suddenly, there were no inhibitions. And then I realized why they did that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I was cool with the mask.
That is a great story. I love it. I love it. Yeah, we become somebody else when we put that mask on, and it in many ways can be it can be a freedom, or it can be a distraction for moving towards who we really are. It's a mask is like any other tool. It can have it holds power, either help our journey or hinder our journey. And again, it all comes back to the person behind that mask.
Is that why the show Mass Singer is so popular?
It's very popular.
Okay, Heck, do you have a question?
Stephen, just to let you know, you're doing the tin can thing. Your microphone is sounding like a tin can.
Okay, well, let's go ahead, Heck, and answer your question, and I will pop right back in.
Okay, I think we had another question.
Let me see if I can help him out real quick.
Okay. Thanks everyone for bearing with us with these technologies. The group here is doing such a great job. This can often be a lot to contend with technologically, pulling these things off.
I think we got Jane. Did Jane already speak?
Yeah, I think Jane. We got to hear from Jane.
I think that's all I see on the panel. Was there anyone else who wanted to ask a question?
Oh, hello. I heard someone.
Yep.
Oh, he's back.
Oh, I'm back here. No problem. One of the things that struck me, and one of the reasons why I joined Rotary and service to others and service to our community is so important to me, is I was at an event called Mythic Journeys, which was what our film was based on, and many people from Joseph Campbell were there speaking. We had a lot of great speakers like John there. And at the end of the 5-day conference, the head of the conference got up and said, these words that we are speaking and these stories that we are telling are very, very important. But unless you take these words and go out into the world and put them into action, we've failed. For our words without action are meaningless to us. And I wonder if you can speak on that, is putting those stories, because people hear about stories and they're like, what, you want me to go tell you about myself? Or what is the meaning of that story? What is the deeper meaning of why it's important? I mean, you have spoken to it, but I wonder if you could speak to that.
No. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to stories that change behavior or move us to engage the world differently, I think oftentimes we'd like to make that something that is formulaic. We'd like to try and find some sort of quick way to move the human emotions, and oftentimes, I've found that these stories have to work on us over a period of time. And I think the behavior that comes from storytelling, the change or action that we must engage in the world, it often comes because stories have had a chance to work on us. Stories have worked on our psyche, and stories have moved us to action. But I think you bring up something really important, Stephen, and that is that there is a natural rhythm to hearing stories that involves the inhale of hearing the story, and then the exhale of what you're going to do with it. How has this story impacted how you're going to move in the world? How has this story changed what your behavior is going to be? Because we are constantly recrafting ourselves in the world, all the time. And often stories are what are moving us towards that recrafting. They're impacting us to engage the world differently. And I believe if we only do the inhale, if we only take stories in and we don't let them work on us to actually move in the world, to change behavior, to respond to those in some meaningful way, it's like trying to constantly inhale. You eventually pass out. And so I believe that natural rhythm of the inhale and the exhale that is involved with engaging stories has to happen. I think, just to build a moment further on it, this is, I think, something that we're seeing happen a lot with binge watching Netflix or various streaming, services, is it becomes very, very easy to just constantly be taking in stories to a point we become numb to it. And I saw a statistic a few years ago that said 150 years ago, the average person encountered something like 700, 800 stories in their lifetime. They would hear the teachers tell, some stories at school. They would hear their preacher perhaps on Sundays, tell some stories. They would hear maybe a relative occasionally on a special occasion tell stories. They would read a story or two in a book if the family had a book or a couple of books. But the average person, 700, 800 stories in a lifetime. And in our culture, they estimate that we are getting something between 7,000 and 8,000 stories a week through advertising, through media. And so there's a sense where, we can become very numb to the power of storytelling and stories. And this is where, storytellers are competing for the attention of audiences in ways that they've never had to before. And I think looking at our story diet, what sorts of stories are we consuming? What sorts of stories are we allowing to be part of our inhale process? That matters. That matters because there's only so many stories we're going to encounter that we're going to be able to act on. So I've tried to be a little bit more deliberate on that. Well, I was such an honor to be here tonight. Please do track me down in any of the ways you see on the screen. I'd love to engage with you. And thank you, Rotary Club, for having me. This was a real honor. It's just a lot of fun to be with all of you tonight.
Well, thank you, John. I know I'm speaking for everybody here as well. We really appreciate it, and we were very excited to listen to you speak, and just love everything you said today. And so for people that would, again, if they would like to find out more information, both about John and about the Joseph Campbell Foundation, you can look up here and see the information there. John has some books out there, so please support the storytellers and go find the books on Amazon or on the jcf.org sites and purchase those books. They're fascinating reads. I am never disappointed when I talk to anybody from the Joseph Campbell Foundation. We look forward to hearing what you're doing in the future here as well. Just a reminder, we meet every Thursday at 7 o'clock from 7 to 8 or so. And most of the time it's a meetup. We come in and just have a conversation. And definitely next Thursday, we'll be having a lot of conversation talking about what John, the questions that he's raised in all of us. So once again, thank you to John for being here. We really appreciate it.